Okay. All right. We're continuing our series on fear versus faith. Our verse that we've been using with this is great is your faithfulness from Lamentations chapter 3, verse 23. And we're going to see today that fear is destructive, but faith builds up. Webster's defines fear as an unpleasant emotion caused by the belief that someone or something is dangerous, likely to cause pain or a threat. Fear is a normal human response. There's physiological, emotional things going on with fear. Some types of fear are healthy. We don't walk close to the edge of a cliff because we're afraid we'll fall off. We don't let kids play in the street because they might get hit by a car. So there's some concerns there. Feeling nervous about teaching a class will convince a teacher to put in the time into studying for that class. But we see even in these examples that fear changes our behavior. And that's the main thing here. Fear causes action. I've read a number of articles from people who have actually studied fear and the effects of fear, and their conclusion, and these aren't Christian writers, but their conclusion is that most of the time, fear is destructive. Some of the things that they have said about that is that when we are afraid, the cerebral cortex, that area of the brain that harnesses reasoning and judgment, becomes impaired. We can't think straight when we're afraid. And then they say it's now difficult to make good decisions or think clearly. Another article, in the face of fear, people might turn to different behavioral patterns than normal. And then they went on to give examples of people who are fearful about not having enough money for retirement, and then they make devastating financial decisions because of that fear. Another article, fear is one of the most destructive emotions. Fear keeps people back when they should be moving forward. Fear destroys relationships. It hampers personal growth, and it can lead people down enslaved paths of destructive behavior. I mean, fear is pretty negative. I mean, reasonable concerns about, not doing something that will actually hurt us, that's one thing. But fear is very destructive. Let's look at what God says about fear. And in fact, what I've read is that God commands something like 365 times, do not fear. Let's go ahead and read Isaiah 41, verse 10, please.
Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. Yes, I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand.
Thank you. Okay, so God says, do not fear. I mean, that's just one example. You can skip down in that chapter and read another example. It's all throughout the Bible. God says, do not fear. But let's turn over to Proverbs chapter 1, and we're going to read verse 7. And then we're going to skip over to Proverbs chapter 9, verse 10.
Or is it verse 7 and the verse 9 through 10?
You are correct. I think I messed
That's
up.
the way it looks like on here.
Let me let's see here what I did. I think I wrote it out there wrong, and I did write it out there wrong. Sorry about that. So it's chapter 1, verse 7, and then chapter 9, verse 10.
Oh, okay. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction.
Okay, now chapter 9.
And then verse 10.
Yes, please.
The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding.
Okay, so wait a minute. If God commands so many times, do not fear, and then he says, fear God, is God contradicting himself? No, I mean, that is rule number one when you're studying the Bible. It doesn't contradict itself. If I see a contradiction, then there's a problem with my understanding. Okay, if I see a problem in the Bible, I've got to check my own understanding and see where that's going wrong. So what does God want us to understand about fear? What does he want us to understand from Isaiah 41:10 when he says, do not be afraid?
It's the ultimate blasphemy.
He is the ultimate wise one. Absolutely. Yep. He's our strength. He will help us. Basically, we have no reason to fear our circumstances. God is right there holding us. And so that's why he said, don't fear your circumstances. But then we've got Proverbs where he's, said the fear of the Lord. Okay, well, what is he talking about here? I think we must be aware of the majesty and the power of God and the vast difference between us as the created and creator God. Too often, because we can approach the throne of God with, constantly. We can get God's full attention. And sometimes I see that breed kind of, some familiarity. Is that a good word to use? That's just kind of like, well, I heard it in a movie one time, me and God are mates. No, God is creator. Okay. You're not on a level playing field here with God. Okay.
There's also the saying, God is my co-pilot. And frankly, God is not your pilot. He's not in the plane with you at all.
That's right. Exactly. And trying to put God on, that even puts God slightly lower than us, because who's in charge? The pilot.
Right.
But we must be, I'm going to turn over to Job here. If you get to First Chronicles, hang a right. Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Job chapter 38. And Job's been, Job is finally complaining just a little bit here, not much, but God answers him in verse 30 and chapter 38, verse 1. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? God is going to go after Job's friends. And and Job is going to listen to this. But then verse 4, God says, where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. In the next couple of chapters, God goes on to describe his power and his care for his creation. Side note, little bit of a soapbox here, but anybody that says that, oh, I've heard Christians say this, God just kind of set the world spinning and then he backs off. No, these next couple of chapters describe in detail how God is involved with his creation, caring for his creation.
Is he actually, he says, is he addressing Job or his friends?
That is a good question. Ask David when he does that. But his friends have been talking. And Job has been defending himself to his friends because they've been saying, you must have sinned. You must have done something wrong. Repent because, God wouldn't do this to you otherwise. And Job is kind of like, I know I am upright. I know I've been obeying God. And then God answers this whole thing.
Telling Job, don't even listen to the thing.
Right. So I'm sure
Job questioned God.
Oh,
there's several times that Job says, I want God to answer me.
Yes.
So he still could be talking specifically to Job
absolutely
here.
Because Job is the one who's going to be who actually would listen, because his friends are thinking that they're speaking for God, and God's going to address that later on too.
Well, I just wonder, because when you read on, it's him, God saying, where were you when I laid the foundation?
Right.
Where were
Verse
you?
1 says he answered.
Yeah. So Job needed to know, because we don't have any indication that Job was ever told why these things happened.
No, he was.
And
because God doesn't answer to us.
Right. He does not. And so God makes that case. I don't answer to you. Your friends better stop speaking for me. And then Job's response in chapter 40 is basically, I'm going to put my hand over my mouth. Basically what the psalmist wrote hundreds of years later. There are times I just need to put my hand over my mouth and stop and listen to God. But the point here of understanding the majesty and power of God, there is a big difference between us and God.
There's a side note that comes into me when his friends came, when they just sat
and shut
they
up.
were some comfort to him. And we worry about what do we say to somebody who's in deep sorrow or whatever.
Just don't say
Hold their
anything.
hand
Yeah.
and squeeze once in a while. When they started opening their mouth, oh.
Yeah, that was a problem.
So we don't set a guard over.
Yep. But again, when God says, don't fear your circumstances, and then Proverbs 1 talks about that fear being, the start of wisdom, understanding the difference, because we're limited in our understanding of that. We're limited by being physical or our understanding of the spiritual. But we can get kind of an idea of this, especially when you're reading the last part of Job, just the difference between us and God and how much God loves us. And that should spur us to want to know more about God. Matthew chapter 10. Matthew 10 and verse 28. Bible. And do not fear those who kill, this is Jesus speaking, do not fear those who kill the body, but are unable to kill the soul, but rather fear him who is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. There needs to be a serious awe and reverential respect for the power of God. And, you know, if sometimes we need a stick to keep us going on the right direction, well, we need to pay attention to that God will punish. We need to be knowing that. But again, Jesus' point in all of chapter 10 is do not fear the harm that people can inflict, but rather know that God is the one who is in control. And what happens if we react to fear by putting our own self-interest above God? We lose. Verse 30, chapter Matthew 10:33, Jesus will say, if whoever shall deny me before men, I will also deny him before my Father who is in heaven. Okay? Because again, so, you know, trying to understand what God means by fear him, be aware of who we're approaching, and just the you know, how incredible it is that God loves us so much that he died for us, that he wants us to have that relationship with us. That's incredible to me.
That's not incredible. It's entirely credible, Kathy.
Okay, it's credible, but it's hard for me to wrap my mind around it.
I know
It's hard for me to understand. Someone who would have hurt me as much as our sin hurt God, how would I keep loving that person? I mean, it's yeah, but this is God. But again, what God wants us to understand about fear, don't fear our circumstances. Don't fear in the.
Somebody hurt your child.
Oh yeah.
And that's what he did for us.
Mhm.
That
Oh yeah.
boggles my mind.
And that would make me afraid of, okay, you know, my sin caused the Son of God to die. That would make me afraid because, like you say, how does a parent respond when their child is hurt? But again, that love of God is something that is just beyond what we can understand. But we're going to see in our next couple of examples that fear, not the fear that God says to have, that respect and awe and you know, realize sometimes that we should come trembling before God. It's kind of, you know, I've messed up, you know, I know you'll forgive me, but wow, I know I don't deserve it, but thank you for being willing to do that. That kind of fear that we should have for God, that proper fear, but the fear that we tend to have, the fear of our circumstances, of what people are going to do or say or what's going to happen, that fear is destructive. I mean, even secular people studying this know that fear is destructive. Any other comments as we're jumping both feet into this? All right, first point, fear tempts us to act out in angry, destructive ways that damage ourselves and those around us. We're going to look in 1 Samuel, starting in chapter 9. We're going to see King Saul chosen by God. And Saul starts out pretty good fella. 1 Samuel chapter 9, we're going to just kind of skip around some of 1 Samuel here. 1 Samuel chapter 9 describes, and verse 2 describes Saul, a choice and handsome man. There was not a more handsome person than he among the sons of Israel. From his shoulders and up, he was taller than any other people. He looked like a king, best looking guy, tall, dark, and handsome. I mean, you know, and when the people saw him, they said, long live the king. I mean, they're excited about this. But Saul was always afraid. I mean, even before he's made king, he's hiding in the bags. You know, he's hiding with the luggage, and they have to kind of drag him out. Okay. And then we see him in chapter 13. He's afraid that his army is going to desert him, and he makes a sacrifice to God that only the priests were supposed to make. He disobeys God. Now, when Nadab and Abihu made a wrong sacrifice, they were instantly killed by God. God doesn't do that. But Samuel confronts Saul. He says, you've sinned here. You've done something you shouldn't have been doing. But Saul did it out of fear. It's kind of like, you know, well, we've been waiting on you, Samuel. People were starting to leave. The army was going, and the Philistines are right over here. But Saul starts out, and I missed Samuel chapter 11, where the first thing that Saul does, he hears that the town of Jabesh is under attack, and it's a pretty gruesome attack. And he gets mad, and he says, anybody that doesn't come together as an army and attack the was it Amorites? Yeah, the Ammonites. Then I'm gonna get you. Okay, but so he starts off, as a defender and protector of God's people, and God is with him. But then we see chapter 13, and then of course chapter 15 is one of the more famous ones, where God has ordered Saul to carry out the punishment on the Amalekites. He says why they're going to be punished, and Saul is supposed to wipe out everything, but out of fear, he doesn't. He saves some of the best stuff, and he says, "I did it because I was afraid." And it's kind of when your army is paid partly by what the spoils that you get. The guys are looking around. It's kind of well, what do you mean you're going to destroy all this good stuff? That's part of my salary. But he says that it was fear. But in verse 26, Samuel tells him that his fear led to rejecting God's word, and the consequences were that God was going to take away the kingdom from him. That his legacy was gone. He was no longer going to be king. His children wouldn't be king. That legacy is gone. And then verse 35, we see of, 1 Samuel 15, we see that this also broke relationship with Samuel. Samuel has been going around with Saul, supporting Saul, helping Saul. But in verse 35, let's see. I am not reading the right one. Where am I? I'm in 2 Samuel. That's why it doesn't make sense. I'm reading about David. It's kind of like, that's not right. All right. First Samuel 15, verse 35. And Samuel did not see Saul again until the day of his death, for Samuel grieved over Saul, and the Lord regretted that he had made Saul king over Israel. Saul's actions, his sin, hurt people, hurt God. But we're going to go on and see in chapter 19, we see Saul becoming afraid of David. David has killed Goliath. David has had songs written about him. David has killed his 10,000. Saul has killed his thousands, and Saul is getting afraid and jealous, and his fear turns to anger. He tries 3 times to kill David with a spear. He just chucks it at him. Yes. And in chapter 18 and chapter 19, he chucks a spear at David 3 different times. And, until finally, I guess David gets the message. And I'm not convinced David was the brightest bulb in the package, but that's from other things. That's from other things. But again, David gets the hint, and he leaves the palace there.
Obviously, the fear made Saul do unrational things.
Yes.
Because he knew God was with David. So why would he even try to kill him?
He starts acting out of anger. That fear led to anger. And yes. In chapter 20, he tries to kill his own son. I mean, he threw a spear with the intent and purpose of killing his son in chapter 20, verse 33. One wonders.
Maybe God guided that.
Yeah, I kind of think. And then Saul took his army and chased David around for several years. We know about that. But then, oh yeah, there was a whole
David had several
lot.
opportunities to return the favor, yet chose not
Yep.
to.
Whole lot going on in there. But then we see tragedy in chapter 22, and this is a legacy that no king would want. I mean, think of where Saul started off as chosen by God, protecting God's people, and then we get to chapter 22. Fear led Saul to lash out in anger against everyone around him. In verse 8, he's accusing his closest followers and supporters who've been, because they've been chasing David around, and he accuses his supporters of conspiring against him. And in verse 17, he accuses the priests in the town of Nob of conspiring against him. And then in verse 18, he orders the death of those priests. Because the priests kind of are saying, it's kind of, well, this is David. David's a good guy. Of course we helped him out. And Saul is kind of like, you're conspiring against me with my enemy. And he orders the death of those priests. 85 priests are killed that day. Other men, women, and children of that town are all killed that day, all because of Saul's fear. That fear turned to anger. Fear changed Saul from protector to kill her. He allowed fear to control him and acted out in anger in ways that were incredibly destructive to his family, to his friends, to his kingdom, and to his relationship with God. Any comments on Saul there? Because Saul's example is extreme, but fear tempts each of us to act out in anger. I witnessed a road rage incident one time in California. Car here, pickup here. The car starts coming over to change. It's busy rush hour traffic. They say rush hour traffic. We're not going that fast, but we're moving along, and the car starts coming over. He clearly didn't check, and the truck swerves and honks, and clearly the guy was scared, startled. It's kind of like almost started my day by getting run off. By getting hit by a car, and that's scary. But then I watched that pickup truck ride the dotted line and then swerve over into the other guy. And it's kind of like that was on purpose. And he nearly caused a serious accident because his fear turned to anger and he lashed out. My mom told me years ago of a woman, someone she knew, who chewed out her husband for buying her flowers. She was worried about finances and felt that he had spent money they probably shouldn't have been spending. And she was anxious about these other things, but that fear caused her to respond in anger, and she really hurt his feelings. According to my mom, she never got flowers again. Again, she was worried about other stuff that made her angry. She lashed out inappropriately, and it hurt someone's feelings. I've got to confess, and Sam will check if I don't, but yesterday I was worried about this lesson. It wasn't working. I'd spent a couple hours in the morning. It's kind of like, I'm not getting anywhere with this. I'm just going to have to cancel the whole thing. And I snapped at Sam. It was lunchtime, and I was just kind of like, and Sam was, and that anger made me feel better for like a millisecond, just a teeny weeny bit of a second. And then Sam asks, "What is going on?" And I'm kind of like, I'm afraid of this lesson. I'm afraid I'm not going to get done. It's too hard. And Sam's like, okay, let's figure this out. It's like, I don't want to figure it out. I just want to be mad about it. But no, I needed to figure it out. Yeah, I know. But fear about safety and security, now that's a very common fear. I mean, we've all, felt those things for our kids. But sometimes sometimes that fear can make us take reasonable precautions. I'm going to save for retirement. I'm not going to touch a hot pan, that kind of thing. But if the fear controls us, it can lead to anger, because anger gives the illusion of being in control. Fear feels out of control. We know that fear is just, it's kind of, but anger, when we let that fear go into anger, we have that illusion of control. Fear tempts us to act out in anger in ways that will hurt others and probably hurt ourselves too. Any comments before we go on to our next point? Stunned silence. I love it. All right. Point number 2. Fear can lead us to act in ungodly ways that we excuse sometimes because those actions feel necessary for self-protection. And we're going to look at Peter. Now, Peter had a lot of courage. Matthew 14:29, when Jesus was walking on the water, Peter had, you can say whatever else you want to say about Peter, but he had the courage and he got out of the boat. I mean, I would have stayed in the boat. It's kind of that there's something weird going on here, all of a sudden out of the dark. I mean, and David pointed this out in Bible class a couple of Sundays ago, that all the pictures, all the paintings that you see of this scene, there's a spotlight on Jesus. No, it's the middle of the night. It's pitch black dark. The waves are doing this, and all of a sudden someone's walking beside your boat. Okay. But Peter was brave enough to step out. Okay. He's still not convinced it's Jesus. Says, if it's you, not a ghost, tell me to come out. Now I'll believe it's you. But he had the courage to get out of the boat. Acts chapter, go ahead. Oh yeah. Wind was contrary. It's the middle of the night, and all of a sudden there's this figure. Not me, man. Acts chapter 2 and verse 14. Peter stood up on the day of Pentecost and he preached. I mean, this is someone, they were hiding in a room, because they were afraid of the religious leaders. Jesus had been killed and they're scared. Now Jesus has left and he's gone back up into heaven. Well, now what? But then on the day of Pentecost, Acts chapter 2, excuse me, on verse 14, Peter taking his stand. Now, when you take a stand, that's an act of bravery, okay? Because people are saying all kinds of things, they're drunk, they're this, they're that. And Peter takes a stand with the other 12 and he speaks out. That's bravery, okay? Peter stood up against the religious leaders when he and the 12 were arrested in Acts chapter 5. And they're saying, hey, we told you not to speak about this Jesus. And Peter tells them we should obey God rather than men. And that got him beat up. Okay. But still, he did these things. He was very brave. Let's go ahead and read Acts chapter 10. This also took bravery. Remember, Peter is a Jew. He has lived his life as a Jew. He knows that one doesn't have anything to do with Gentiles. Acts chapter 10, verse 34 and 35, please.
And Peter opened his mouth and said, truly I perceive that God shows no partiality, but in every nation, anyone who fears him does what is right and is acceptable to him.
Thank you. All right. This is brave of Peter. He has lived, this is generations, of Jews who know we're not supposed to have anything to do with Gentiles. We're not supposed to intermarry. We're not supposed to, we just don't have anything to do with them. And Peter goes in the face of that, and God has taught him a lesson, and he has listened to that lesson, and he is responding to that lesson the way he should. And he realizes that he's the first to realize that the gospel is for everyone, not just the Jews. And he has to defend that. If you look down at Acts chapter 11, verse 3 and 4, let's see, verse 2, when Peter came to Jerusalem, those who were circumcised took issue with him, saying, you went to the uncircumcised men and ate with them. You did something that you knew you should not be doing. He says, but Peter began speaking and proceeded to explain to them in orderly sequence what had happened and why he came to this conclusion that God's message, the gospel, is for everyone. That took courage, okay? Peter's a brave guy, all right? Until he's not. Let's go ahead and turn to Galatians chapter 2. And this can happen to any of us. We're going along great, and then all of a sudden we stub our toe. And so Peter very much, I don't have the same personality, hoof and mouth disease that Peter did, I hope. But again, that same thing of we're going along great, until we're not, until we trip. Okay. But then we've got to pick ourselves up. Yes.
I really love Peter.
Absolutely. Because he shows us that, yes, you're going to trip, but yes, you can pick yourself back up again because Jesus will forgive every time. All right, let's go ahead and read Galatians chapter 2, verse 11 to 14, please.
Now, when Peter had come to Antioch, I withstood him to his face because he was to be blamed. For before certain men came from James, he would eat with the Gentiles. And when they came, he withdrew and separated himself, fearing those who were of the circumcision. The rest of the Jews also played the hypocrite with him, so that even Barnabas was carried away with their hypocrisy. But when I saw that they were not straightforward about the truth of the gospel, I said to Peter before them all, if you, being a Jew, live in the manner of Gentiles, and not as the Jews, why do you compel Gentiles to live as Jews?
Thank you. Peter knew better. God gave him an actual vision, a picture of why the gospel is for everyone. Okay, he's a leader in the church. He knows better. He's an apostle. He was with Jesus for 3 years. He saw Jesus interact with all kinds of people, the Samaritan woman, all kinds of other people. And yet he stopped doing what he knew was right because he was afraid of Jewish Christians who believed that Gentiles had to be circumcised. These Christians, they were Christians that came to Antioch, but they believed that that one must first be a Jew to be a Christian. And Peter went along with it. Maybe he told himself, it's like, well, I'm not saying that you have to be a Jew to be a Christian, but he didn't stand up and say, no, this is wrong. What he did was that he stopped doing what he knew was right. He's thought, I mean, yeah, he had defended it just a little while, just before, and we read about in Acts. And it seems like a small fear after all these big fears that Peter had faced. I mean, he had been arrested. He was arrested after James had been killed. I mean, so his life is literally in danger because the king had just, beheaded James. And then he's arrested. It's kind of like, okay, I'm next. He'd been through all these big fears. And yet here comes a small one. It's other Christians, but they're saying, hey, those are Gentiles. You shouldn't be spending any time with them. We're not supposed to. We're Jews. And he says, okay. Yeah. And again, it seems like this small fear made him change his behavior in a way that he knew was ungodly. And he acted in an ungodly way to protect himself from the reactions of Jewish Christians. There's consequences to Peter's fear. Okay. He acted in a way that he knew was wrong. Remember, fear causes action. Paul said that, he's doing what he knows is wrong. So that's why Paul went to him and confronted him. His actions had to have a negative effect on those Gentile Christians. We're all Gentiles in here, right? Say Peter is in here and he's eating with us. We know he's a Jew, but he's eating with us. And we know that's a big deal for him, but he's been doing it. But then other Jews come along and he stops. How does that make us Gentile Christians feel? Are we second-class citizens? I mean, what's going on here? You were friends with me until your other friends showed up. Really? That's not very much of a friend.
Still have people like that today, though. They're your
Oh,
friend
yeah.
until others show up,
Oh,
and then
yeah.
they'll.
Hypocrisy is very strong.
Oh, yes. But that's what is happening here. And that's what Paul says, that Peter acted hypocritically. He knew what he should be doing, and he acted differently. He caused other Christians to act hypocritically, even Barnabas. I mean, when you read about Barnabas, he is a stand-up guy, and yet he was pulled away with that and influenced by that. Maybe we, like Peter, are worried about what people think about us, or I just want to avoid conflict. So I won't say the wrong thing, but I just won't say the right thing. I won't do the wrong thing. I just won't do the right thing. Okay, because I don't want that conflict. I don't want people talking about me and teasing me about being a goody two shoes and all this kind of stuff. And so I just won't do. I won't do. And this is probably what Peter's thinking. It's kind of, well, I won't do the wrong thing, but I just won't do the right thing. So again, James 4 and in verse 17, James has an answer for that. And I know Anita knows this one. That for the one who knows the right thing to do, excuse me, and does not do it, for him it is sin. And that's what hypocrisy is. Hypocrisy is sin. I mean, so again, when we do what we know we should, we just, but it's so easy, isn't it? It's kind of, well, I'll just keep quiet because I don't want conflict. I just don't want to. And we think that that's okay, and it's not. And that's what Peter was doing. He was just keeping quiet. It's kind of, well, I just won't eat with them this week. These guys are visiting. They'll be gone in a couple of weeks. I'm making this up. Okay, this is I'm totally making this up. But if I was Peter, here's how I would be. It's kind of, well, these guys are just visiting. They've come from Jerusalem. They're just going to be here for a couple of weeks. It won't be a big deal. I just won't go over there this week. I'll go next week. It won't make any difference, but it does. And it's wrong to not do what we know is right, or to not say what we know is right. Yes. I thought you had a.
No, I was just.
Okay.
My head.
Okay. Okay. But if we act out of fear to protect ourselves, that fear can prevent us from doing what we know is right. And that is hypocrisy. And that's what Peter was caught up in. Peter, who had bravely gone to jail, been beaten up, stood by Jesus. Walked on the water, all these things. And yet these are my buddies, and I don't want to act different around my buddies.
There's a lesson in that. Be careful not to follow somebody blindly that is a very strong Christian. Don't put your
Right.
faith in a person.
Yes, and we see that a lot. Well, that's why Paul says, imitate me as I imitate Christ. He's aware I don't do it, that he doesn't do it all the time, but says where I'm imitating Christ,
Well, my
do that.
husband did it, so it's okay for me to do it.
Yeah, because again, when Peter starts doing it, he influences others, including Barnabas. Barnabas, who was a strong stand-up guy. I mean,
Even he.
yeah, he got carried away with this because fear is destructive. Any comments on this part? Okay. Well, now we're going to see that the antidote to fear is the power of God, because faith builds up. God is stronger than any destructive force on this earth. I mean, he has promised that he is with us through each and every circumstance that we encounter. Does that mean that bad things don't happen? No. Does that mean that that things aren't going to happen? That's kind of like, okay, I should be afraid of this, but I'm going to do it anyway. Okay, because God is with us. Doesn't mean that bad things aren't going to happen. It means that God is in control, and God is a rewarder of them who obey him. Now let's go ahead. I think I gave someone John 14:27.
Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you, not as the world gives, do I give to you. Let not your hearts be troubled, neither let them be afraid.
Thank you. All right, so Jesus is speaking here. He says, I give my peace not like the world does. What is it about the world's peace? Temporary, very temporary.
Technically, the world has no peace.
Pretty much. It's an illusion.
Yeah.
It's kind of, okay, we'll have peace. I won't beat you up as long as you do this. That's the kind of peace that the world offers. It's kind of like, I won't hurt you as long as you do what I like.
Right.
That's the kind of peace that the world offers. And and that's not the peace that Jesus offers. He says, I will reward you. I mean, that I will be with you. And that promise, I mean, when God blesses us, he blesses us with each other. I mean, that where we can hold each other up, where we can help each other, and we can know that God is always with us. Philippians 4, verse 6-7, please.
Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus.
Thank you. All right. But again, do not worry about anything. Well, what about, these 6 other things that I worry about all the time? It's kind of like there's no exception there. I mean, why doesn't Paul write, be anxious for nothing except these other things that I want to be worried about? I just want to hold on to these worries. No, because they get in the way. Okay. Because they take over. They cause us to get angry and hurt other people. They cause us to not do what we know we should be doing, to not say what we know we should say. They affect how we act. Fear causes action. Let's go ahead and 2 Timothy 1, verse 7, please.
For God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind.
Thank you. All right. And we see in just these verses, and there's tons others, that God has promised us peace and joy and the strength we need to overcome any circumstance. Right now, he's promised those things. We have to decide. And that's a scary thing to me. I mean, God gives us choice. And we have to decide if we're going to follow him. We have to decide if we're going to allow him to give us his peace, or if it's, no, keep your peace. I want my fear. Really? But I do that every day when I want to hang on to my fear. I'm just saying, no, keep the peace. I don't need that. It's kind of like, and I'm kind of like, that is the dumbest thing I do. But I don't know about y'all, but I'm afraid at times, and I worry about things. And God is saying, but wait a minute, I've promised you peace. You can know that God is in control. We can know that God has overcome everything, and that we have that promise of heaven where God will wipe away every tear, where there is no more pain, there is no more hurt. We can know that. And this short life, I turned 60 a little while ago. It's kind of like, man, that was fast. Okay. And when the writer talks about life being a vapor, it's kind of, yeah, it is. It's going by real fast. And again, but I want to be so focused on this short little time instead of focused on eternity. Because if we focus on eternity, then all these fears, all these worries, they just don't have control. Fear has control when we give it to it. Fear has control when we focus on now and not on eternal.
You have to have bad with the good to appreciate the good.
Oh, absolutely.
So I think your lifespan is what you've got to learn to control so that you can have the good.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, you don't grow without pain. I mean, I remember when we first moved here and we're unpacking, I had a mountain of bubble wrap. And Sam caught me staring at that bubble wrap one afternoon. He's like, no, you can't wrap Sarah up in it. She was off in Europe at the time on a school thing. And he's like, no, because again, if you don't grow, if you don't have your bumps and bruises that go along, you don't understand the good things and the blessings and the peace if you haven't struggled with this other, because you know that God has brought you through that. Very good point.
No peace until you have had suffering.
Yes, absolutely. All right, Hebrews chapter 10, verse 35 to 39, please.
Therefore, do not cast away your confidence, which has great reward. For you have need of endurance, so that after you have done the will of God, you may receive the promise. For yet a little while, for he is coming and will come and will not tarry. For the just shall live by faith, and if anyone draws back, my soul has no pleasure in him. But we are not of those who draw back to perdition, but of those who believe in the saving of the soul.
Thank you. This world is a scary, dangerous place for anybody. I mean, nobody gets out alive. Okay. You know, nobody
Not unless the
survives.
Lord comes back.
Nobody
before we
survives
got
this
here.
world. That's right. Nobody survives this world. And it's a scary, dangerous place for a Christian. But the Hebrew writer is adamant in verse 39 here. He says, we are not among those who shrink back to destruction, but of those who have faith for the safekeeping of the soul. Any comments before we close up here? Okay. So King Saul, he was a fighter who led and protected Israel, but his fear led him to act out in anger with tragic results. I mean, destructive results. If fear controls us, it can lead us to anger because anger gives the illusion of control. Fear tempts us to act out in anger in ways that hurt others. Peter had a lot of courage, but in Antioch, his courage failed him, and he acted in a way that he knew was wrong. And it was hurtful and harmful to others and pulled others away from what they knew was right as well. And sometimes we act out of fear because we think we need to protect ourselves. But who's our protector? Who can do a so much better job than I can ever even think of doing? God can. But that fear can prevent us from doing what we know is right. Fear is destructive. Faith builds up. The antidote to fear is the power of God. We must remember that God is our protector. I can't do a very good job of that. I just really can't, you know. And I look at my life and I look at things that has happened. It's kind of like, wow, if I was actually in control, boy, things were a mess enough anyway. But I got through those things, and I can look back on that. I want to finish with 1 Peter chapter 5 here. Therefore, humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, so that he may exalt you at the proper time, having cast all your anxiety on him, because he cares about you. And then verse 10, after you have suffered for a little while, the God of all grace, who called you to his eternal glory in Christ, will himself perfect, confirm, strengthen, and establish you. To him be dominion forever and ever. Amen. Thank you so much for your time and for your comments.